Greetings. You are listening to We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia in Washington, D.C. The music is an instrumental version of a song called Clean Rivers, which is performed and composed by Brent Peterson, who is a neighbor of We Act Radio Studios and has given his kind permission for us to use his music. In just a moment, we will begin Community Through COVID, which, as the name suggests, provides important information and perspectives on COVID-19 in our local community and nationally, with an emphasis on voices that are not often heard in the official narratives as this pandemic is discussed. We encourage you to subscribe to communityundercovid.com, to follow us and like us on all social media platforms. And if you are in a position to offer financial support, this program has been provided as a public service of We Act Radio, and financial sponsorship will help us to continue the program into the future. Please visit communityundercovid.com or contact We Act Radio directly. We'll get started with Community Through COVID in just a moment. Good morning and welcome to Community Through COVID on We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia in Washington, D.C. I am Virginia Avniel Spatz, and I am delighted to be joined this morning by Jorge Vasquez, newly appointed Director of Power and Democracy Project at the Advancement Project, the national office here in DC. And later in the show, we'll be joined by Yolanda Narva, who is Executive Director of Operation Understanding. And I do want to note that this program had to be pre-recorded because we had some technical difficulties at our airtime, and I apologize for that situation. In addition, before we launch into our discussion with Mr. Vasquez and Ms. Narva, I do want to just let listeners know that you can find information about this and past programs at communityundercovid.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Community Under COVID and through We Act Radio's social media pages. Please do visit the blog at communityundercovid.com for updates on recent programs and calls to action. I note that a few weeks ago, we heard from the V2VR, Vacancy to Virus Reduction campaign, a campaign that is organized by people local to DC who have experienced housing insecurity and who are working to fill vacant apartments in order to serve residents who are currently experiencing homelessness and to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in the entire community. You'll also see a positive update. We heard a couple of weeks ago from advocates for Ronnie Long, who was at the time serving a sentence that many believe was wrongful, and he had been in prison for 44 years. He has since had his conviction vacated and is home with his wife and is now working for improvement of conditions for others in that North Carolina prison who are still at high risk for the spread of COVID, and in addition, others who may have had wrongful convictions. I also want to note, sadly, that our program about ICA Farmville, the ICE facility in Farmville, Virginia, has had a somewhat negative follow-up in that the outbreak of COVID continues, the inhumane conditions continue, and instead of addressing them, officials in Virginia have participated in activities that may be worsening conditions for people who are detained there. So please visit communityundercovid.com for the updates, both positive and negative, and where possible, please go ahead and take actions that are suggested by those we've had on the program previously. And now let me introduce Jorge Vasquez, who, as I mentioned at the top, is new director of Power and Democracy at the Advancement Project National Office. He is brand new, and he will be directing a team of attorneys and advocates who are protecting the voting rights of people of color, combating voter suppression, and supporting grassroots campaigns to restore voting rights to returning citizens. The Power and Democracy team will also work to counter voter disinformation and advocate for voter accommodations with election officials in these final weeks before the election. And I will now introduce Mr. Vasquez and ask him to say a little bit about the Advancement Project and his work with this Power and Democracy team. He is new to this position, although I believe he is not new to the district. Mr. Vasquez.
I'm local to DC. I'm calling in from Maryland. So I'm in the DMV area. I'm happy to be in the DC area and you know, truly blessed to be a part of the Advancement Project National Office and be able to run the Power and Democracy program, especially with the 2020 election around the corner.
And are you brand new to the Advancement Project, or were you working for that project earlier?
No, I'm new to Advancement Project, not new to election work or civil rights work. I've been doing civil rights work for over 2 decades and was recently with Latino Justice, formerly the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, where I handled many voting right cases and issues of democracy.
And so your new position is with this team that supports grassroots campaigns to restore voting rights and to protect the voting rights of people who've been experiencing active campaigns for voter suppression, voter disinformation, all that kind of thing, which is so urgent right now. So maybe we can just go right into that, and you could tell me a little bit about the first things that you will do now that you are in this position.
Absolutely. There are a few things that we have already started doing, and we've been running a robust voter protection program this year. We've already successfully completed advocacy in Virginia and Florida, working with, like you said, grassroots organizations. What we're doing is we're training those most closest to the issue to be able to empower their communities. We believe in an inclusive democracy where all eligible voters should have access to the polls. We're a nonpartisan organization, and for the 2020 election, we're focusing on 6 different states. We're focusing on Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we're focusing on Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Michigan, and Arizona. And in each of these 6 states, as well as in other states, we're working with grassroots organizations. So in Virginia, right next door, we're working with New Florida Majority. We're working with other organizations to make sure that they understand what's needed ahead of the 2020 election. Many times what organizations do is they just want to roll out an election protection day of or during early voting. But what we found at Advancement Project and what we know through our decades in this field is that many of the issues that happen on election day could be corrected if individuals just start having meetings with the right officials prior to election day. So what we do with our program is we educate grassroots organizations and allow them and provide them with the resources that they need in order to have a successful election. So that means having discussions about what does it look like voting during COVID? What is a non-excuse? How can you go about meeting with elected officials to have meetings around a secure voting plan? What does it look like to ensure that there's language access to our limited English proficient voters? What does it look like to make sure that, you know, votes are counted, that if there's a misstep, that there's a curing process and that voters are informed whenever a vote is getting challenged or whenever there's a a technicality on a ballot, which is important, especially during COVID, as you're aware. But I would be remiss if I didn't note to your listeners right now that we're about 14 days away from the decennial census, from the self-response rate, and it's imperative for communities to participate on the 2020 census. The 2020 census really has to do with our community. Certainly, it has to do with power as it relates to access to elected officials, but also just our fundamental right to access certain benefits, certain government buildings, education. And we know that in Maryland, we're going to lose around $1,800 per person for every person that's undercounted. In Virginia, around $2,000 per person. And what that really tells us is because the census is for 10 years, we're at risk of losing about $20,000 per person who's undercounted. Challenge listeners to call up 5 people, get them to fill out the census if they haven't already, and save your community at an average $100,000 over the next 10 years.
Wow, that is another urgent issue. And I think I will also just point out for those listening who might not know, because I'm not sure if everyone knows about the Advancement Project, that you have other teams that are working on the school to prison pipeline, getting police out of schools, and doing active legal work in many states around those issues as well. And there are links from our blog to find those projects.
Yes, please check out our website, advancementproject.org. We have several programs, all rooted in community, all rooted in making sure that individuals from the community have the resources, power, and knowledge to address issues that are at home, and at home being the general community. Although I'm an attorney, although we have many attorneys, we understand that the true power comes from the people. And that in order to move forward as a 21st century civil rights organization, that it's imperative for us to be collaborating with those closest to the ground. So if you're a grassroots organization, if you're someone looking to be active, we're a nonpartisan organization. We don't play politics. What we make sure we do is that all eligible voters and all people who should be eligible to vote have access to the polls. And as you said about police-free schools, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we want to limit the amount of law enforcement that's at polls also. And that in many communities, law enforcement at polls is a form of voter suppression. So one of the initiatives that we started this year is we started memorandums of understanding with local law enforcement groups. So if you're in a community that's over-policed and you want to figure out how to run an election limiting police presence as it relates to the appearance of voter suppression, please reach out to Advancement Project National Office. Follow us online. We're on all social media platforms.
Okay, that's an important issue for people to keep in mind, and I'm sure that'll be an important resource for many people, including here in Washington, D.C., where I've lived here a long time. I have usually voted in person. The primary election was a disaster. People were in line for 4 hours, and it was just a mess. And then, of course, we had this mailing to us that really wasn't clear what to do with it. We've had a lot of odd issues, and I appreciate what you're saying about having meetings with the Board of Elections, but how does that isn't the average citizen's way forward. What do you recommend for just a voter who's concerned about their vote?
For a voter who's concerned about their vote, you need to create a plan. You need to create a voting plan. You have 48 days to November 3rd, the presidential election. And it's imperative that whether you're going to vote in person, if you're going to vote early voting, whether you're going to vote by mail, that you have a plan. And if you're going to vote by mail, you need to vote early. You need to understand that local states and officials have a tracking process. So you can literally go online call a number and see, has your ballot reached where it needs to be? Is there any issue with your ballot? For example, did you forget to sign somewhere? Did you forget to check a certain box, which is a technicality? But in order to make sure your vote counts, you want to make sure that you're tracking your ballot. Also, when you're tracking your ballot, if November 3rd comes and you see, hey, my ballot hasn't been counted, what do I do now? It's important to know that you're still allowed to vote in person. There's a way to go about that process. And at Advancement Project National Office, we're happy to work with anyone as it relates to training community groups and individuals around best practices, how to cure your ballot, how to track your ballot, what polling sites are open, how to set up a meeting, how to see if there's a site that's changed, and things of that nature, just so we can make sure that the average person understands in layman's terms, how can I make sure I vote? I want to vote. I know voting is important, but how do I vote? And how do I make sure that my vote is counted? And these are things that the Power and Democracy team at Advancement Project's National Office is working on, and working with community groups, community-based organizations, and advocates to make sure that the messaging is able and available to those who need it the most. And also that we're providing it in multiple languages, because we understand that not every eligible voter's dominant language is English. In fact, the United States of America is one of the few countries that doesn't have a formal language or a national language.
Mm-hmm. And I know that we were only scheduled to go to 11:25. Are you able to stick around for a few more minutes to?
Sure, I could go to 11:30 if that would be helpful.
That would be great. So I appreciate your patience with this whole technical process this morning. So I did want to ask, I have 2 adult children who live on the West Coast in that horrible set of fires, which is its other, another whole issue for voting and for many other problems. But on the other side of the equation, they've been voting by mail since they moved out there, and without issue and without any question that there's been extra fraud or anything. So are there good examples of where the mail-in process has worked well? And what do you say?
Yes, certainly. Overall, the mail-in process has worked well as it relates to fraud. It's less than 1% chance of fraud as it relates to mail-in ballots. However, the mail-in ballot system varies from state to state and is highly technical. So for example, what we recently learned by watching the Pennsylvania election is that 40,000 ballots were challenged because of a technicality. That could be something as simple as forgetting to check a box, sign the outside of an envelope, sign different places. Of those 40,000, about 20,000 were successfully challenged, which means that 20,000 votes didn't count because of a technicality.
Wow.
What we're doing at Advancing Projects National Office is we're training individuals on literally how to complete a ballot to make sure that it's aligned with the law and that there aren't any technical flaws. And also on how to monitor your ballot. Because if you monitor your ballot, then you're able to know if there's an issue. And many times the issues are something that could be fixed, within minutes. But if you don't fix it within the right amount of time, then your ballot isn't counted. So it goes to highlight the importance of really having a plan to vote, executing your plan to vote early. We have 48 days to the election. If you need assistance with filling out or how to fill out a vote by mail ballot, or you don't understand some language that's within it, please reach out to us at Advancement Project's National Office online, advancementproject.org. We're on every social media platform. Feel free to tweet at us, and we'll be happy to provide you guidance. But it's important to know, during COVID, people are fearful. What we're learning from many of our meetings is that we need poll watchers. We at Advancement Project National Office have teamed up with Power to Polls, also a nonpartisan organization, to make sure that people are being recruited and understand the opportunities that are available to power our democracy. And literally, we need individuals, and particularly those younger voters who may have stronger immune systems, to volunteer to be a poll monitor inside the polling places, to make sure that our polling places are up and running, that they start early, that we're able to limit long lines.
Okay, and that also raises for me some kind of flags, because I grew up in Chicago, where the vote challenging process was extremely partisan and political. And, you know, this idea that people would be challenged in the polling place, their vote would be challenged at the counting of the votes. Are you setting up legal advisors or some kind of people to watch that?
Certainly, we have a complete, robust system. And it's important to note that any kind of voter intimidation is against the law. For someone to challenge me if I walk into the polling site, or when I walk into the polling site, simply because I'm a Black Latinx male, then that would violate the law. And there's recourse for things like that. And at Advancement Project National Office, we're working with different partners, advocates. For example, we're working with Movement for Black Lives, which currently has over 2,000 attorney volunteers for election protection. And we're training attorneys and advocates alike on, just like what you said, what happens if someone challenges you at the polls? What are your rights? How do you overcome these things? And this is also why we're meeting with election officials prior to, so that way we understand exactly how each locale is going to handle certain situations. Because many of these things are things that have happened in the past, and that we know what practices work and how to address these issues. Also, it's important for individuals, and particularly within the Latinx and Black community, who may have the same name as somebody else, and maybe that person isn't a voter anymore, maybe that person changed party affiliations or something to that effect, to make sure that all eligible voters are on the roll and that everyone could cast a ballot safely.
And so I know we have hit the bottom of the hour. It is 11:30, and I so much appreciate you coming to talk to us on your, brand new position. And as you mentioned, there are
8 days.
48 days. So I'm actually hoping that maybe we can have another conversation.
Yeah, sure. I would love to come back on. Maybe we could do it 30 days out, so that way we can let people know about early voting, how to get involved. But please follow us online. If you have a question, no question is too small or too large for us. If you're a grassroots organization and you're looking for a partner, you have questions, please reach out to Advancement Project National Office. We're here to help. Our Power and Democracy team is excited. We're energized. We've created a robust plan for the 2020 election, and we're rolling it out full steam ahead. And thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Listeners, you've been listening to Jorge Vasquez, who is the new director of Power and Democracy at the National Office for the Advancement Project. And as you just heard, he has told us he's going to come back and talk to us again in a couple of weeks. And thank you for those who were listening for your patience with some of our technical difficulties. And we look forward to an update on this. Is such an important issue. And we're so glad that you're willing to talk to our listeners about this. And all the best in the work, and we'll be back in touch.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Same to you. Same to you.
Bye.
Bye. Before we move on to our second segment today, September the 16th, I do want to first remind listeners that you are listening to We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C. I am coming to you from my dining room table, and our guests are coming to you from various locations, as has been the practice during this pandemic. We will look forward to getting back into the studio as soon as COVID-19 makes that possible for us. In the meanwhile, I am just delighted that our our guests were able to join us in these less than ideal circumstances. I apologize for some of our technical difficulties. And I do want to say once again, I'm really thankful to Mr. Vasquez for joining us in his first week with the Advancement Project's national office in these crucial weeks before the November 3rd election. And also, before we start our second segment, I just wanted to mention something I didn't have time to bring up while Mr. Vasquez was still with us, which is that We Act Radio and the Advancement Project have previously collaborated on an event. It was last September in honor of the Advancement Project's 20th anniversary. Ben & Jerry's released a special edition ice cream called Justice Remixed. It was really delicious. It was very hard to find beyond that event. But during the event, the ice cream was available free to community members, and community members were invited to come and practice artistic graffiti that was sponsored by Words, Beats, and Life. And we had DJs, we had music, we had community, we had fellowship, and people had the opportunity to learn ways that individuals can be involved in helping the Advancement Project to achieve racial justice at our polls, in our schools, and in the streets. And we have been grateful, We Act Radio has been grateful for the opportunities to collaborate with the Advancement Project. And I just wanted to make sure that we mention that before we leave this segment. And so we will shortly be joined by Yolanda Savage Narva, who is Executive Director of Operation Understanding DC. And again, I am Virginia Avniel Spatz. You are listening to We Act Radio in historic Anacostia, Washington, DC.
Peace, peace. What up, y'all? This is Common right here, and we are now in tune with the people for sure. We doing the work out here, and we chilling with my man. Come on, We Act Radio. Let's go do something. Yeah, love.
Yo, peace world. Gil Scott Heron said, change is inevitable, but rather than simply continue to go through the change, we are here to direct the change. My man Common is here to support the movement that's happening in DC. What's up with gentrification in your opinion, Common?
Well, for me, gentrification is really like messing up the situation and taking our land and taking our areas away from us. We know that that's what it's doing, but it's really a disrespect to us as black people and our culture. And it's like an invasion on the space that we created and the space that a land that we like nurtured and made sure that this land was truly ours. And it took us time to earn that land. So for them to come in and move in and just say it's ours now and not even respect what we've done is a disrespect. We can't allow it to happen. My father always used to tell me, man, make sure you take care of the land and get land. So we got to keep our land and make sure that we have our places and do whatever we must do to fight that. Fight people coming in with gentrification. So don't mute DC, for real. That's on the real.
I'd rather be with you, yeah. Yeah, I'd rather be with you. Whoa, I'd rather be with you, yeah. Yeah, I'd rather be with you. I'd rather be with you instead of at home on my sofa. I'd rather be on Georgia Avenue at Sankofa. Yeah, and that's for life, baby, forever. Hey, you better believe me. You better believe me.
Let's see how we can make a place like Sankofa, the other black businesses around, protected. Yeah. So that this idea of developing a city doesn't mean rolling over us. We have to stand firmer. We can't just be victims all the time. Say, oh, please don't roll over me. Oh, please don't roll over me. No, we don't have to say that because we built this damn city.
DC! DC! Sankofa! Sankofa! Oh, now. Get your ass out and vote. This ain't the election to sit home and learn. Get your ass out and vote. Get your ass out and vote.
Glad that you were able to join us this morning. And as I said, we are joined by Yolanda Savage Narva, who is Executive Director of Operation Understanding in DC. And I'll ask her to just give a little bit of background about that program for listeners who might not know.
Well, first, Virginia, thank you so much for having me on this morning. And we are all operating as best we can, in the age of COVID with with our Zoom platforms and other things that we're using to connect with the public. So hang in there. I'm happy that we're recording it and it will eventually go live. And so my name is Yolanda Savage Narva. I'm the Executive Director of Operation Understanding DC. OUDC is a regional, I guess I could say it's a regional nonprofit organization that's been around for 26 years this year. And the organization really focuses on the need to build an intercultural community. And so we do that through our youth. We bring them together for a year-long program that focuses on building bridges, learning about one another's cultures and values, doing some self-reflection and identity work themselves, and then using the tools and techniques that they gain as part of their time in OUDC to really spread repair to the world, as well as understand their individual role in making the world a better place. And so here we are, even in the time of COVID, continuing to run our programs with our students this year. And we're on class number 26, actually.
26. And
Yeah.
so these programs that you're mentioning are for high school students, right? Is that correct? The students join a cohort of Black and Jewish people primarily who learn about civil rights and organizing, and it is high school, right?
It is high school for the most part. We have had some pilot programs with younger students as young as 4th and 5th grade, but our traditional program is with high school students, and we focus on the historical and cultural experiences of the Black and Jewish populations, but we have also just this year expanded our demographics to include students who identify or who do not necessarily identify as Black and or Jewish, but are interested in learning through that lens and interested in being allies or abolitionists against racism, anti-Semitism, and discrimination.
And so in what I guess I'd call I'll just say in a previous year, the students would have taken a physical tour. They would have gone to locations in the South. They would have gone up to, I think, New York City. Mm-hmm. And how is that working this year?
So, as you know, we've had to do a complete pivot, and we did not have an opportunity to take our historic trip through the Deep South, loosely following the Route of the Freedom Rides of 1961. We moved the New York portion of our trip to the fall, which we will not be able to do that as well. And so we really use the opportunity, though, Virginia, to bring speakers, leaders in the field, leaders in the community to the students that they would not normally have the opportunity to engage with. So we had an opportunity to bring speakers in nationally to share with students what their involvement has been in the civil rights movement, what's happening with current events, and really bridging, I think, this, this gap that we aren't able to do because we go south and we go to New York. We had an opportunity to really meet and engage with people from around the country.
So this pivoting has been, many of us have had to do it in many different kinds of ways, and it has huge drawbacks, and I'm sure that it is hard for the young people to make some of the friendships that they might make more easily if they were in physical proximity to each other. But it also opens great opportunities, as you said, in national speakers who can speak to the students in a very direct way that they might not get. So what would are you finding that some things are not exactly a silver lining, but that the new model is working for students?
I think they're making the most of it. And I really applaud our students for their flexibility and their resiliency. I mean, a lot of them know what the program consisted of just last year, and they know students from, from the previous year. So they know what I guess I could say, quote unquote, normal year would look like. But I also think that this has pushed them to be creative and be innovative and figure out ways to connect with one another virtually, and use those opportunities to build the relationships that they were able to actually start at the beginning of the year, because we had an opportunity to meet several times before the pandemic forced us into our separate homes and facilities. So they do have that foundation. And I call this my special class, because they've had to deal with unusual circumstances, and they have really risen to the occasion to make the most of this time.
That's wonderful. And it also, I have been thinking about the situation with the Jewish community more widely, in that Jews have, like most congregations of any stripe, have not been able to gather physically, with some rare exceptions. And it has caused some limitations, but it's also opened up some opportunities. For example, I'm signed up for a Rosh Hashanah program that's happening in Madison, Wisconsin, and I live in DC. So that would not have been an option on a previous year. And there are many things that are available to us that might not have been. So do your students usually participate in any kind of Jewish, like, high holidays experience, or only the Jews would do that? Do they do it together?
Interesting question, because this month we have actually focused on Jewish history and culture because of the high holidays. And just this past Sunday, we had a program on Rosh Hashanah, and we introduced the high holidays to our students who don't identify as Jewish. And we had an opportunity to have our Jewish students share stories about Rosh Hashanah and what it means to them. We brought in a rabbinic student who is also a Jew of color, and talked about kind of liberation and what it's like to be a student in the rabbinate at this time, and share her story of Rosh Hashanah and what it means to her. And it was a really powerful program. And I really think that this is what OUDC is about. It's really about building those bridges and sharing with one another each other's stories, each other's cultural perspectives, so we can build that intercultural community that we talk about.
And another thing that occurs to me is, you said that the students were able to meet one another in actual physical proximity at least a few times. But even if not, one of the things that has been really obvious to me is that in this pandemic, relationships that we already had are so crucial, and our communities would otherwise be very segmented. So the fact that you have groups of Jews and non-Jews who know one another, and when this holiday comes around, they can talk to each other, and they can talk to other students they might know. In this pandemic, do you find that that's a particular strength, that they have these relationships?
Oh, I do. And I think because the pandemic has revealed so many health disparities and inequities, and uncovered what's going on in our country, for the students to have this opportunity to engage with students who are directly impacted by what's going on in this community really deepens the relationships that they have, and I think strengthens the understanding around community and around how all of these issues are impacting everyone. And it helps you to kind of have a bit of a paradigm shift and continue to think about yourself in all of this, but how it affects others and how it affects us as a collective community as well. And so I'm really starting to see that interaction happen with them right now. And it's really, it just warms my heart to see it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And if I understand right, the students are from this area to start with, or are they?
They're from either DC, Maryland, or Virginia.
And so, one of the things that I have noticed, for regular listeners already know that I'm a white Jew living in Washington, D.C., but if you're listening for the first time, now you know. One of the things that has been a struggle in COVID, perhaps, it's always been a struggle, but this is, as you said, kind of revealed some long-lasting differences. One of the things is that many of our Jewish communities are predominantly white, and in DC, a lot of our Jewish communities are in wealthier, more protected areas, and I live in Southeast, where a lot of my friends are more directly impacted by the housing crisis, the situation with not being able to pay the rent, with people who are living on the street, all kinds of things that some of my friends from Jewish congregations that live in a different part of the city or out in the suburbs don't experience all the time. And I do wonder how the students are dealing with those very stark differences, or are they?
That's a good question, because we have a range of students, Virginia. We really, this year in particular, have a range of students from not just varying racial and ethnic backgrounds, but various socioeconomic backgrounds as well. And we can see in real time that some of our students are affected in the general ways that everyone is affected from COVID. And then we see the very nuanced and even covert ways that overt ways that our other students who don't have access to certain things and who are not in certain areas of the city are impacted by COVID. And one example I can use is just having access to the kind of technology that some of the other students don't, and it makes it more difficult for them to connect and to be a part of our programs and learnings, just because of a lack of access to a computer or high-speed internet. And so, because we have students who are coming from different backgrounds in that sense, we have conversations around those, and our students can actually see real time the impact of this pandemic on students who don't necessarily have the same means as they do. And it's an unfortunate lesson, but it's a valuable one at the same time.
And the lessons that I don't know that much about the program, but I've heard students who were part of it speak before, and they often talk about historic differences. They're very moved by their trip to the Deep South, and tend to talk about racism as though it were something we kind of overcame with the civil rights movement. And I don't know for a fact, but I wonder if your students are experiencing this particular year, if they're experiencing things a little differently. Now, of course, 2015, or pick any other year, there were plenty of police killings and issues that would raise an understanding that racism isn't over. But I'm wondering if this has been a particularly hard year for your students.
I think it has, and I think because of the way our program has been designed in the past, that oftentimes we are thinking about racism as being removed from what's happening right outside of our front doors. And we think about racism and poverty and disenfranchised people living in the South. And of course, you know, there's a disproportionate number of people who are experiencing that. But I think this pandemic has allowed our students to understand that this is going on right in Washington, D.C. This is going on in Maryland and Virginia. This is going on in our backyards. And because we haven't had a chance to actually travel south, we've really focused on bringing local leaders to speak with our students, to talk about health inequities and health equity and the lack of that. I apologize for my email, and the lack of access to quality health care right in Washington, D.C., right in the jurisdictions that they live. And so I think that has helped them understand the historical piece, but how that translates into what's happening today, and that we can't separate those things, that this is just a continuation of what we saw 401 years ago, you know, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the new Jim Crow, and what's happening today.
And also in terms of anti-Semitism, I think people at different points in history like to think of it as something that's past. You know, we don't have quotas for Jews getting into Princeton or things like that, but we do have the person in the White House tweeting out pictures of Bernie Sanders being the puppet master for Joe Biden and that kind of a thing. So is that also a part of your programming, teaching about the history of anti-Semitism?
It is, and it's very much alive here in the United States as well as abroad. And we talk about anti-Semitism. As a matter of fact, we just had a program specifically about anti-Semitism because we want, you know, we want our students to understand anti-Semitism separately from other, you know, oppressive ideas and bigotry, but we also want them to understand it and how it connects with racism and oppression, and how, you know, this overall narrative of white nationalism actually puts anti-Semitism, racism, and other isms, Islamophobia, you name it, in one package together, and how intertwined the two are. And the need, honestly, for our students who don't identify as Jewish to be right on the front lines of fighting anti-Semitism, and then our students who you know, who identify as white to be on the front lines fighting racism. Now this is all of our cause to remedy and to fight against. And so I think they're really starting to understand that.
Well, that is quite a gift for high school students to get in this day and age. And, you know, actually for the last 26 years, I think, you know, it's quite a challenge. I mean, it's very difficult territory. And I think it's amazing that you have these young leaders coming up with this information and ways of discussing the problem. So are there, I mean, actually, I was thinking while you were talking, like, I guess that's why I used the word gift. It's like, I feel a little jealous, like I wish I had access to some of those resources, either when I was a teenager or, you know, like last week. Do you have resources that are available to, you know, to people who aren't in that particular program?
We do. There's a way, I think, if people want to reach out and they want specific things, we can share some of the learning objectives and speaker series that we have for our students. I wouldn't say that we have materials ready, but we could definitely pull together things that people may be interested in. We have a lot of resources that we use for our own programming, and so we would be happy to share that.
And one of the things, as I said, I've heard students speak, and that's because I belong to Temple Micah, which is a place that often has students as part of this program, and they usually make some kind of talk at the end of their experience to explain what it meant. But I don't know, do all students go back to their communities and speak in that way, or is that what they're encouraged to do?
That's an excellent question, and they do. It's actually a part of the curriculum, and they are in that season, I guess I could call it, where they are really paying it forward and highlighting their experience in OUDC, talking about the things that have been, impactful for them, how it's leading them in the direction that they want to go. And they're also in the process of setting up what we call facilitations or conversations around unconscious bias and stereotypes and fighting racism, fighting anti-Semitism and discrimination. And so although they would normally go out into the community, in their churches or synagogues or mosques and schools and do these, we're setting them up over Zoom actually. And people are starting to reach out to us to request our students run facilitations and workshops for them. And so they do this for their own communities, but we also take requests and would be happy to share our services with other community members if they're interested in having our students participate. They are passionate, they are committed, they are, they're ready to get out there and share what they've learned with others.
And is that for students who are active this year, or do your alumni do that kind of thing as well?
Our alumni have definitely done that. This year they've been active doing a lot of other things in the community, but alums are trained to do it as well. And I've called on them before to come and help us out and do that. So once they have those skills to be able to facilitate these challenging conversations, it never leaves them. And some of them are doing it with the organizations they work with and schools and their own community. So alums are definitely still a part of this shared learning.
And if individuals, is there a new cohort starting soon, or is this one going on through the school year?
This one ends in December, and we are making plans to recruit a new cohort in 2021. So we haven't really started the official launch of recruitment, but it's coming soon. So anyone, who's interested in the DMV, who, I think we're still starting with 11th grade. That's our plan. Who's interested in participating in the program, please look us up, because we're starting our recruitment in a couple of weeks.
Okay. And how many students are we talking about each year?
Typically, we have 22 to 24 students. We don't exactly know how we're going to do that in the coming months, because we're starting a class during COVID time, and so that's going to look a little bit different. So we're still playing with that, but our typical number of students is about 22 to 24 students.
And so the students are coming toward not exactly toward the end of their year, but I guess they're kind of wrapping up in a way. And I'm wondering, do you think, we've talked about a number of things that have been different for these students, but do you think they're coming away with a really different learning experience than students did in past years, or is there something common? And I know you haven't been there for 26 years, but is there a common thread that runs through?
I think so, Virginia, because I think every year the students' experiences are different. And so I think the common thread that I see throughout all of the classes, even this class who hasn't been able to convene in person, is this commitment to social justice and equity, and wanting, no matter what, to try to leave their mark on making the world a better place. And I think in addition to that, another thread that's common is this, this sense of understanding other people and wanting to learn more about, their fellow brothers and sisters and what they can do to support them. And those two things, I think I have definitely seen during the time I've been a part of the program. I've seen these threads with alums that I know as well. And I see it in this year's class as well.
And so anyone can look at communityundercovid.com to get a link. Do you want to give some additional ways to get in touch with you or to just find Operation Understanding DC?
Of course, you can always visit our website at www.oudc.org. If you would like to contact me directly, my email address is it's a long one, Savage, SAVAGE, Narva, NARVA, that's all one word, at OUDC.org.
Okay, and are there any closing thoughts that maybe a question I didn't ask or something that you'd like to tell listeners about this this year or this experience in general?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity, Virginia. I would add that I have learned a tremendous amount from our kids, and it's been really humbling to watch them take what they've learned from OUDC and start applying it into their daily lives. And I am so honored to have the opportunity every year to be a part of the growth of the students who come in. But in addition to that, I'm learning so much from them, and I am so excited to see what they do in their lives.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, listeners. We have been speaking with, she just spelled out her whole name, Yolanda Savage Narva, who is Executive Director of Operation Understanding DC, which is regional but located, the offices are here in Washington, DC. You can find more information from OUDC.org and through communityundercovid.com, which is the blog for this website. I thank everyone for their patience. We had some technical difficulties airing this program, but I'm so glad that people got to learn about Operation Understanding and about these young people who are going to, obviously they're going to be our future, and they're going to be a lot better prepared than many of us were. So I thank you. I want to thank you for that, and thank the students for taking on what really is some hard work. And we will, maybe we can also arrange another time to have a follow-up conversation, maybe bring some students on if that's something that is acceptable for the students. I know they're teenagers, but they still have, they have to get permission, and they are supposed to be at school. However, we define that at 11 o'clock in the morning, but perhaps we can work something out. In any case, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And this is Virginia Avniel Spatz for We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, DC. And thank you so much.
Do you draw the line between you and I? All that's broken on the riverside. Is it a natural state, how it's supposed to be? I think there's something that we just don't see. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. It's not a new thing, it's been centuries. Old habits die hard, I think we'll all agree. It's now or never, it's not too late. Change starts with us, it starts today.